Not too long ago, around mid-November 2011, Konami had finished work on a title known as Escape from Merrywood. This particular game was more of an experiment in design and advertising rather than a AAA project, not given any advertising or knowledge to press of any sort, and initially only released in a few locations as a test release. Due to the minimalist cost of its development, such an experiment was not at all costly, at first. The game, released on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, no Wii version for reasons that will soon be obvious, only in a few select GameStop stores peppered throughout the states of Massachusetts and Maine, included with a special code to be entered into their website, which will allow direct feedback to the marketing and PR departments. The experiment was an overwhelming failure. Out of the feedback given, approximately 98% of the people who bought and finished it was extremely negative, and in some cases, violently angry. As damage control, the game was pulled from shelves, a complete product recall issued that would return the customer's money at double retail price, as well as hefty donations given to the stores and employees to keep quiet about it. The game stricken from any records, and those involved in its development were given even bribes or threats of terminations as a gag order. Of course, any attempts to ask Konami about the game will just get you denials and sent across phone trees until you give up. That's why I'm the one willing to talk about the game. I never gave up my copy for the recall, and thus have not received any sort of silencing bribe, leaving me free to speak as I wish. Feedback on the game's content notwithstanding, the marketing for Escape from Merrywood was absolutely brilliant, being that there was none at all. Not a word of it ever reached me before finding it and sitting on the shelf of my local GameStop. What caught my eye, though, more than anything, was the box art, which looked like a chalkboard with the scribble of a weird human-like character on it, like a jointed stick figure, though one arm was bloated and claw-like. This creature was the only thing on the box, not even a title across the top, nor the spine. Hell, the price tag hadn't even been put on it. Curiosity gripped me like a vice. Not knowing what the game was about, or even called, sent me right to the counter with it in my hand, forking over my $60 and jetting home as fast as possible. Starting up the game would be the standard affair, Konami logo and all that, leading to a rather nice menu screen, keeping the chalkboard motif that was on the cover. There weren't as many options to choose from. Being a single-player only game, you really only have New Game, Load, and Options. After selecting New Game, you are immediately thrown to the game after a short, rather haunting jingle. The first thing the player would notice is the beautiful, surreal, and rather terrifying graphic style. Everything looking as if it were drawn by crayons. The player lost in a forest of black and green, the night sky depicted in red. The second thing one would notice is that white creature from the box right in front of them, and charging with a horrific scream. Such an abrupt ending led to quite a few players dying immediately, as being touched by that creature results in a brutal mauling, made even worse by the game's first-person perspective. What are you supposed to do is actually quite clear if the shock of the creature doesn't paralyze you. Simply turn and flee. The character's sprint, while not unlimited, is swift enough to carry for a playthrough for a good 30 seconds or so, and they will eventually come across a village of poorly drawn huts and stick figures. Upon reaching this village, the creature stops chasing the player, and can be heard lazily walking away into the darkness, its heavy thumping footsteps slowly receding, while the player's character collapses from exhaustion and the screen fades to black. Thankfully, the game autosaves at this point. When the player regains control, the time of day will have shifted to morning, the red sky now a pleasant blue, the childishly drawn sun having a smile on it even. Walking around the village, the stick-figured people will inform the player that the creature known as Mary, a guardian of sorts who seems to enforce a curfew on the village of the forest, attacks anyone who leaves their home at night, or tries to leave the forest entirely. From here, the player is given quite a bit of freedom, able to buy a sword and even a handgun from the village and go off into the woods. I admit, the first time I went out of the village during the day, I nearly had a heart attack as I encountered Mary almost immediately. Thankfully, when the sun is up, Mary will not harm the player and even chat with them. The sun is so nice. Don't look directly at it though, he'd chirp, all the voices in the game being garbled gibberish. Mostly Mary's dialogue is either exclamations of how nice the day is, how cute the animals are, or generic advice one would give to a child, such as don't talk to strangers. While he is pleasant, for lack of a better word, the player is advised not to attack Merry in any way, as he turns immediately hostile and is completely invincible to damage. Getting hit by its massive claw arm results in a rather piercing scream from the player character, as well as the screen starting to rip as if it were paper being clawed at it by a bear, until being entirely sliced to ribbons and falling away, replaced with "You are dead," a sad face emoticon, and an option to continue or quit. However, as long as you do not attack Merry, attempts to go past a certain boundary on the map, helpfully outlined with red, or leave a village at nighttime, the player can pretty much ignore him, though they may also talk to him to get new dialogue, which will be explained later. Upon reaching the second village, either by following the map or simply wandering about, the player character will come to learn that Merry is indeed invincible, and can only be killed by any damage he inflicts upon himself. The player will also be laughed at for asking the likelihood of Merry committing suicide, as he is the happiest thing alive. In case the last sentence didn't hit you like the brick it is, let me spell it out for you. The objective of this game is to escape the woods by finding a way to make the happiest thing alive kill itself. From here, the player's duty is to wander the woods, searching for any artifacts scattered around, as well as searching for things like Merry's happiness shrines, which are crudely made altars adorned with flowers, trinkets, and even candles. The player finds these altars and must destroy them with complete and utter malice, smashing them, ripping the flowers apart, stomping on the sweets, etc. Along the way, they'll have regular enemy encounters, mostly hostile wildlife, bandits with knives, and even these strange guys called Aussie men, who carry handguns and tend to be rather annoying surprises when you get shot in the back. In addition to breaking these altars, the player is encouraged to observe Merry, see which animals he's taking a liking to or what items he seems fond of, and either killing/destroying them while he is away, or finding a way to do so in front of him without being seen. This is where Merry's additional dialogue comes in. Talking to him after breaking a few altars will have him talk about an unfortunate accident, but the more the player does to wreck his emotional state, the worse his dialogue gets, to the point of Merry flat out saying things like, "Please leave me alone." Eventually the player will come across the items necessary to complete the game: a teddy bear, a faded photograph, and a lighter. Once the player has all these, they may confront Merry by trying to leave the forest, and waiting for him to come charging at them as always. This time, however, instead of being killed, which in the case of the attempted escape would be an instant death via cutscene, a QuickTime event will appear labeled "Present Teddy." Upon doing this, Merry will stop in his tracks, angrily ranting about how he's starting to suspect you were the one doing all these awful things to him. If you wait too long, Merry will attack and kill you, so instead the player has to ignore his ranting and press the attack button, which will lead the character to rip off the teddy bear's head. Merry will screech in an agonized fashion, his angry rant turning into one of a child whose pet just died, and from this point he will not attack. The player must continue pressing the attack button, the sequence of events following being throwing the teddy bear to the ground, taking out the photo, setting it on fire, and tossing the flaming photo into the ripped teddy bear. The entire time, Merry will be screaming, sobbing, saying how he just wanted to make you happy, but the player is to ignore this and continue pressing the button, which will lead to the character screaming insults, telling Merry nobody likes him, that he'd be better off dead, and flat out telling him to kill himself. And the last few lines simply being, "Do it," repeated again and again, after a painfully long time telling this creature to die. The weapon select menu will appear on screen, though the option Equip is replaced with Offer. From here the player can choose anything. Giving Merry a sword will lead to him stabbing himself repeatedly. Giving him a handgun, he shoots himself in the head. Giving him nothing, he runs into a pack of nearby wolves and lets them devour him. The most painful thing to watch, though, is giving him a shotgun, where the beast will clumsily fumble with it until the barrel is in his mouth and pull the trigger with his normal hand. Regardless of your choice, though, the instant Merry falls dead, the music comes to a halt, and the graphics suddenly change, going from a crude canyon to sudden realism. The perspective remains in the first person as the player steps over something that can't be seen, and calmly exits the forest, stepping out of the woods onto a highway where a beat-up old truck is waiting. The entire time, only the sounds of footsteps, the opening of the truck's door, and the starting of its engine are heard as the player character begins to drive off, the game's ending cuts to a sudden black, no credits, and booting the player back to the main menu. So this was a very interesting one. I think I had just stumbled across it. I found someone with like 200, 300 views reading Escape from Merrywood. And the concept is incredibly interesting, I have to admit that. Konami designing a very interesting kind of game where it's a blend of like a survival game, but also a little bit of like an immersive sim with a very interesting kind of like child's drawing aesthetic. It's very fascinating to think about, where there is like survival mechanics, you talk to villagers, and it was definitely like underwritten in the story. But it's a very interesting game where the concept is to make the big bad enemy only hostile at certain points or in certain contexts. Like, you emotionally torment it until it kills itself. And we aren't really given much of a backstory for this creature, but you can definitely kind of fill in the blanks of what it's supposed to be and what it like might represent with like the photos and like the little icons and shrouds. But the story does have a lot of problems that really bugged me. Something you couldn't see whilst I was narrating is that the grammar is just horrible. Everything, it just trips over itself. It's so like obnoxiously worded. There's no hyphens where there should be. Things just don't make sense, and I had to kind of speak for it in a lot of circumstances because it was just so clumsy. The second part is that I unfortunately just didn't find it believable at all that, first of all, Konami would make this game. I simply just won't think that happened. Secondly, they would sell such a short game, because the way the narrator describes it doesn't seem like the game takes that long. You just find a couple shrines, so like you could do this in like an hour or two. I can't imagine this would take a very long time, and they would sell that for full price with no marketing. If anything, because this was in the Xbox 360 era, this could have just been like an Xbox Live Arcade title, easily, that would have costed like $20. And then it could have just gotten delisted with like nobody playing it after 2 months because it was such a flop or whatever. I feel like that would have been a much more reasonable thing than having this like dumb explanation of like, they're gonna get you, bro, if you don't give in your copies. They only gave it out to 2 states in America. Like, what? Okay. That's kind of silly. I can't be the only one who thinks that's such a ridiculous way to like contextualize why nobody knows about this game. It was a very short story. I feel like there is a very strong idea of what type of game this is. The author is definitely like figuring out here, and I wish he went into kind of like more explicit and descriptive detail, because you could have crafted like a whole game from this. Like, if this were a popular story, someone would make a fan game out of this that could have been really tremendous. It's such a cool art style and like an objective. It's really original, and that's what really carries the story, is that there's so much thought put into it. There's so many times where like a game nobody's heard of in these terrible creepypasta stories is like there's no attempt to be realistic or memorable or anything other than like, I found a scary game and it went hyper-realistic, black eyes bleeding. This seems like almost plausibly a video game, which is such a rarity for these stories, so I have to reluctantly put Escape from Merrywood on the good side of like stories read for the channel, but it could definitely use a rewrite, I would say. A very extensive rewrite I would love to read, because it's a very, very fascinating concept. Now, I should ask if anyone else found the concept interesting or not, because I feel like opinions might vary on like the qualities here. Some people might have the idea, kind of carry it for the rest of the story, while others might just kind of reject all of it. But I would like to know what everyone thinks about it in the comments section below.